Captain Rachel Torres tightened her grip on the yoke, eyes scanning the storm-darkened skies ahead. The massive cargo plane, a C-17 Globemaster III, groaned under the weight of more than 50 tons of supplies, food, water, and emergency medical kits meant for towns cut off by a relentless Alaskan winter. Normally, flying this route was straightforward, a 3-hour hop from Anchorage to Seattle. Today, however, the storm had other plans. Winds battered the fuselage like fists, and lightning arced in the distance, illuminating the mountainous terrain below. Her co-pilot, Lieutenant Mark Fisher, muttered under his breath, "I've flown storms before, but nothing like this." His words were drowned by the roar of the engines, which had begun sputtering in tandem with the shaking fuselage. Electrical panels flickered in warning. The backup systems were barely holding. "Engines 1 and 2 fluctuating," he said, his voice tense. "We might not make it." Rachel's eyes narrowed. She had faced danger before, but nothing like this. Yet her hands were steady, her mind razor-sharp. This was not fear, it was focus. She quickly calculated vectors, wind speeds, and ground proximity. There was no room for hesitation. "Mark, I need you on instruments. Watch our heading." "Trust me," she commanded, voice calm and unwavering. He nodded, the way junior pilots nodded at legends, though they had yet to realize who sat beside them. The storm intensified. Sheets of rain turned the cockpit windows into mirrors of white and gray chaos. Turbulence slammed the aircraft down, lifting it violently a second later, like a toy in a child's hands. Lightning struck closer this time, illuminating the peaks of the Chagak Mountains like jagged daggers. Below, the frozen valleys waited to swallow them whole. Rachel took a deep breath, her mind shifting into a rhythm she hadn't felt in years. This was more than flying, it was dancing with death. Every maneuver had to be precise, calculated. She banked the plane sharply, dodging the worst of the winds, then leveled it just in time to avoid a ridge that threatened to slice the fuselage apart. Mark's hands were trembling, and he looked at her in awe. "I've never seen anyone fly like this," he whispered. And he hadn't, because Rachel Torres wasn't just any cargo pilot. Years ago, she had been an F-A-18 Super Hornet pilot, a decorated Top Gun ace who had flown missions that pushed men and machines beyond the limits of possibility. But that life had ended abruptly after a classified operation went wrong. The details were buried in military files, her name quietly scrubbed from headlines. Civilian life had been a necessary mask, a way to escape ghosts she could never forget. Yet, in moments like these, her training returned automatically. Muscle memory, split-second intuition, and nerve-tingling anticipation of danger, the hallmarks of a true fighter pilot, guiding her every move. Another violent gust sent the plane spinning slightly. Alarms blared. The cargo shifted, and unsecured supplies clattered across the hold. Rachel's co-pilot cursed under his breath, panic creeping in. She steadied the aircraft with a series of micro-corrections, each one invisible to anyone who hadn't mastered the skies at supersonic speeds. Her jaw tightened, a bead of sweat tracing down her temple. There was no margin for error. 300 lives were counting on her. Her mind flickered briefly to the people below. Families stranded in small Alaskan towns, children counting on supplies that might not reach them. Each life, each heartbeat, weighed on her conscience heavier than any medal or accolade she had ever earned. She had left the glory of Top Gun behind, but responsibility had never left her. Mark spoke again, voice tight with urgency. "Altitude dropping faster than projected. If we don't adjust, we'll hit the ridge in 30 seconds. Rachel's eyes darted across the cockpit instruments. There was one chance a maneuver that would have terrified any civilian pilot. But for her, it was instinct. She pushed the throttle forward, banking the aircraft violently to the left, then executed a near-impossible climb over the ridge. The plane lurched, metal groaning in protest. The world outside was a blur of wind, rain, and lightning. Seconds later, they cleared the ridge. Silence fell for a heartbeat, broken only by the hum of the engines. Mark exhaled shakily, glancing at her with wide eyes. You just how did you? Rachel didn't answer. Her eyes scanned the horizon. The storm wasn't over, and she couldn't afford distraction. Yet, for a fleeting moment, she allowed herself a small acknowledgement. She had saved them. And she would save the people waiting for those supplies. Hours passed as the storm raged on. Rachel navigated treacherous mountain passes, dodged violent downdrafts, and kept the C-17 stable when it seemed impossible. She relied on instincts honed over years of dogfighting at Mach speeds, instincts she thought she'd buried long ago. Each decision was a calculation. Each movement of the yoke, a silent battle with nature itself. Finally, as the sun began to pierce the storm clouds with pale golden light, Rachel guided the plane to a remote military airfield near Seattle, one that had been prepped as an emergency landing site. Tires screeched against the icy tarmac. She applied brakes gently, coaxing the massive aircraft to a safe stop. Around them, crews rushed forward, amazed to see the cargo intact and the plane still airborne. Mark looked at her, speechless, his hands trembling. "Captain, I don't think anyone's ever done this before." Rachel exhaled slowly, her face stoic, but her mind racing. She had saved over 300 lives today. The storm, the mountains, the chaos, they had all bent to her will, if only briefly. She knew the headlines would call her a hero, but she didn't care. Heroes, she thought, were often lonely, and she preferred it that way. As the crew began unloading supplies, Rachel quietly stepped away, leaving the applause behind. Reporters would arrive soon, eager for statements, for pictures, for stories. But she didn't want them. Her past was hers alone, a quiet truth buried under layers of courage, sacrifice, and secrets she had carried for years. One thing was certain. In the skies, where few dared to tread, Captain Rachel Torres was unstoppable. And though the world below would never know the full story of the flight that had just saved 300 lives, she would carry it in her heart forever: the storm, the fear, the sheer exhilaration of living fully in a moment when everything depended on her skill, her mind, and her courage. And somewhere in the clouds above, a former Top Gun ace had quietly reminded herself why she had ever flown in the first place. The storm had passed over Alaska, leaving a skeletal silence across the snow-covered peaks. At the nearby Air Force radar station, Blake Reynolds, and Capt. Ethan Shaw huddled over their screens, reviewing the chaotic flight data from the earlier storm. Something about it didn't add up. The C-17 cargo plane's maneuvers had defied every known standard for civilian aviation. Banking angles, micro-adjustments in extreme turbulence, split-second corrections that saved the aircraft from certain disaster. They were moves Reynolds had only ever seen in combat simulations. Shaw leaned closer, eyes narrowing at a specific set of coordinates. "Blake, look at the flight pattern here. That's not just skill, that's fighter pilot level." His voice was hushed, almost reverent. They exchanged a glance. Both knew the implication, yet neither spoke it aloud. Then the call sign appeared in the logs. Raven 6, Reynolds froze. The name sent a chill down his spine. Raven 6 had been a legend, a Top Gun graduate, one of the most decorated fighter aces in recent history. But she had vanished nearly a decade ago under mysterious circumstances. Her records classified, her career quietly erased from public knowledge. Rumors had circulated for years. A secret mission gone wrong, betrayal from the Pentagon, and a sudden, unexplained retirement. Many believed she had disappeared for good. Yet here she was, or at least, her call sign was. Shaw exhaled sharply. There's no way. Could it be her? A cargo pilot? Flying in Alaska? Reynolds rubbed his temples. I've seen the way she moves a jet, Ethan. I've read her training files years ago. No civilian has that reflex. No civilian can survive what she just survived without military-grade experience. The two pilots continued to replay the flight data, frame by frame. Every maneuver was precise, deliberate, almost surgical. Even the moments when the engines sputtered, the plane didn't falter. Whoever was flying that C-17 had an instinctive understanding of aerodynamics and combat strategy that was decades ahead of ordinary pilots. Do we tell anyone? Shaw asked cautiously. We can't just let the brass see this without knowing. Reynolds shook his head. No, not yet. If it really is her, the last thing we want is attention. Raven 6. She doesn't belong in the news. She never wanted it, and she certainly doesn't need it now. As the two men debated, Rachel Torres had already disappeared from the airfield, blending into the background of an otherwise ordinary civilian crowd. She had refused interviews, refused the flashing cameras, and the questions from reporters who wanted a story that could sell millions of papers. To the world, she was simply a heroic cargo pilot. To Reynolds and Shaw, she was something far more. Meanwhile, rumors began spreading quietly among the base personnel. A cargo pilot had saved hundreds in a storm no one else could have survived. That was impressive enough, but the radar logs told a different story entirely. Small murmurs reached the ears of senior officers. Whispers of top gun-level skill and the call sign Raven 6 trickled through channels. People began to speculate. Could the cargo pilot be the same legendary ace who had disappeared 10 years ago? Rachel, meanwhile, returned to her small apartment, stripped of the uniform and the accolades. The flight replayed in her mind. The turbulence, the lightning, the terrifying drops in altitude, the faces of those depending on her. Relief washed over her, but so did a familiar, gnawing tension, the tension that came whenever someone recognized the truth of who she was. She moved silently around the apartment, methodical, almost ritualistic. Each movement reminded her of a life left behind, the life of a fighter pilot, of missions over deserts and oceans, of split-second decisions that had once determined who lived and who died. She had chosen this life of quiet anonymity for a reason. Fame and attention had always brought danger. The world did not deserve her story, and she did not deserve their scrutiny. But the storm had changed something. For the first time in years, she felt eyes on her, not only those of reporters, but of people who understood what she could do. The radar pilots, the F-22 squadron people who could see beyond the civilian mask. She was no longer just Captain Torres. Somewhere out there, she had already become Raven 6 again in their minds. Back at the radar station, Reynolds and Shaw quietly tracked her movements. They weren't going to confront her, yet military protocol demanded caution, but they were watching. Every radar ping, every flight path she took, revealed more than just skill. It revealed instinct, intuition, and a history of combat that was both beautiful and terrifying. Reynolds leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. If it is her, the world doesn't know what they're looking at. They think they saw a miracle flight. They don't realize it's a lifetime of preparation and pain behind it. Shaw nodded. And if she ever comes back into the fold, we're talking about someone who could change the entire game. For Rachel, that was a thought she pushed aside. She wanted nothing to do with the Air Force, the bureaucracy, or the media circus. She had saved lives today, and that was enough. She would fade back into anonymity, just like she had after her last mission. The ghosts of her past, those she had fled from, would not catch her this time. But fate, as it often does, had a way of intervening. The storm had revealed more than her skill. It had exposed a truth she could not hide forever. Someone had noticed. Someone who remembered her past. And sooner or later, Raven 6 would be called upon again, not by choice, but by necessity. Hours passed. The storm dissipated entirely, leaving a crisp, cold silence over the Alaskan peaks. Rachel sat by her window, staring at the snowy horizon. The world outside was oblivious to what had just happened. 300 lives were safe, but the storm had stirred something far more dangerous, a chain of events that would lead her back into the skies she had once sworn never to fly again. And across the radar networks, in hushed tones among pilots and officers, one name began to circulate again: Raven 6. It was more than a call sign now. It was a warning. Somewhere deep in Rachel Torres's heart, a spark of anticipation flickered. She had flown through storms before, literal storms, metaphorical storms, storms of fire and steel, but the one that was coming would test her like no other. Not only would she have to protect lives, but she would have to confront a past she had tried desperately to bury. The storm over Alaska had ended, but the storm in her life was only beginning. The quiet of Rachel Torres's apartment was deceiving. The storm outside had passed, leaving only the hush of snow settling against the windows. But inside, her mind was a battlefield. Memories came unbidden, sharper, more vivid than she had dared to remember in years. Her fingers brushed the edge of her flight jacket, worn and faded from countless missions, and suddenly, she was back in the cockpit of an Fi-18 Super Hornet. Engines roaring, the sky a blur of clouds and fire. It had been a mission in the Persian Gulf, a training exercise that had escalated into something far more dangerous. Her squadron had been tasked with intercepting an enemy formation, a routine operation until intelligence failed. Missiles streaked across the sky, all eyes vanished in clouds of smoke, and Rachel had been forced to make a choice no pilot should ever face. Follow orders and risk civilian lives, or defy command and face the consequences. She had chosen the latter. The memory replayed in perfect detail: the flash of an incoming missile, the explosion that sent one of her squadmates tumbling from formation, the desperate radio calls she could no longer answer. She had saved civilians on the ground, but lost friends in the sky. The aftermath had been brutal. Her career effectively ended by those who couldn't forgive her decision. They had called it insubordination, a reckless disregard for protocol. They hadn't seen the lives she had saved. They hadn't seen the terror she had stared down in the cockpit, the impossible split-second calculations she had made. She had walked away from that life, leaving behind the bright hangars and roaring engines for cargo flights and anonymity. Alaska had seemed perfect, a place where no one knew her history, where she could simply be Rachel Torres, pilot, nothing more. Yet the storm had reminded her that the past never truly stayed buried. Her instincts had guided the C-17 through the most violent weather she had ever faced. Instincts born in dogfights over hostile skies. Instincts honed under unimaginable pressure. Now, as she sat in her apartment, she felt the familiar tension in her shoulders, the one that always arrived when danger approached. She hadn't realized how much she had missed it: the adrenaline, the clarity, the singular focus of life and death decisions. Yet alongside it came the weight of the memories she had tried to bury, the faces of the lost, the sound of orders she had refused, the betrayal by those who had once trusted her completely. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from the reverie. It was a message she hadn't expected. Two names she had not seen in years. LT, Blake Reynolds, and Capt. Ethan Shaw had left her contact information. "We need to talk," the text read. "About your flight. About your identity." Rachel stared at it, the room growing colder despite the heater running. She knew what it meant. Her past had found her. The people who had recognized her skill, the skill that should have remained buried with the last dogfight she had flown, were tracking her. They weren't journalists. They weren't civilians. They were pilots, professionals, who understood exactly what she could do. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to delete the message and retreat further into isolation. She had survived storms before. She could survive this one. But the thought of those pilots, young, skilled, relying on the instinct of someone who had been tested and forged in fire stirred something she had long kept dormant. She could not simply hide. Not when her skills could mean the difference between life and death. Rachel rose from her chair and moved to the small table where she kept her flight logs from her civilian work. They were meticulously organized, every mission recorded, every obstacle noted. She had become obsessed with precision, perhaps as a way to atone for past mistakes. But the logs could not erase her memories. They could not undo the guilt that weighed on her. Her mind drifted again to the Persian Gulf, the mission that had ended her career in the Navy. She had been ordered to engage a target that intelligence said was hostile. But as she approached, she realized it was not enemy combatants, but civilians' innocent lives caught in the crossfire. She had made the call to abort, to protect those lives. The consequences had been immediate. Her commanding officers called it a breach of protocol, her accolades stripped, and her name quietly removed from official records. She had become a ghost, a shadow among pilots who once revered her. And yet, despite the pain, despite the isolation, she had never regretted her decision. The faces of those she saved remained with her, the children, the families, the people who would never know the sacrifice behind the maneuver. They were her true reward, the only measure of success she had ever cared about. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Rachel froze. She hadn't expected anyone, not here, not now. The knock came again, more insistent. She approached cautiously, peering through the peephole. Outside stood two men in plain clothes. At their posture, the subtle insignias on their jackets told her everything she needed to know. They were Air Force, and they knew her past. She opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" Her voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "We know who you are," said the taller of the two, his eyes steady. "Raven 6. The words hit her like a cold wave. Not her calcine, they had remembered. They had tracked her. And now, she was no longer just Captain Torres. She was the ace pilot the world had tried to forget. Rachel's mind raced. How had they found her? Was this a trap? She wanted to retreat, to close the door and disappear into the anonymity she had so carefully cultivated. But something in their demeanor, a quiet professionalism mixed with urgency, told her they weren't here to harm her. "We're not here to arrest you," the other man said gently. "We're here because we need your help." Rachel laughed bitterly. "My help? I'm a cargo pilot now. I don't fly fighters anymore. I don't do missions. I'm not who you think I am." Reynolds shook his head. "We know exactly who you are. And the thing is, there's a situation. Something only you can handle. Lives are at stake." Her stomach tightened. She wanted to say no. She wanted to retreat. She had left that world behind for a reason. But the thought of innocent lives in danger, the same lives she had sworn to protect in her last mission, pulled at her. The weight of responsibility, the same force that had guided her through countless dogfights, stirred again. She closed the door slowly, motioning them inside. "Talk," she said, voice steady but cautious. As they laid out the details of rogue aircraft, stolen technology, a threat that ordinary pilots could not intercept, Rachel felt the old fire ignite within her. She had tried to escape her past, but it had caught up with her. The world needed Raven 6, and despite her fear, despite the ghosts that haunted her, she realized she was still the only one who could stop what was coming. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to embrace the truth. She was not just Captain Torres, the cargo pilot. She was Raven 6, the ace pilot who had faced impossible odds and survived. And now, the sky was calling her back. The shadows of her past had found her, but she no longer feared them. They were a reminder of what she had endured, what she had survived, and what she was capable of achieving. The storm may have ended, but a far greater challenge awaited, one that would demand every ounce of skill, every memory, every instinct she had honed over a lifetime. And for the first time in years, Rachel Torres smiled. The past was never truly gone. It was waiting for her, and she was ready. The morning sun barely cut through the thick Alaskan haze when Rachel Torres stepped outside, the cold biting at her cheeks. The world felt deceptively normal, birds chirping faintly, the snow crunching underfoot, but her instincts told her otherwise. She could sense it in the air. Something was coming. Something that required skills she had tried desperately to leave behind. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. The number was blocked, but she recognized the tone immediately official, precise, and unyielding. She answered, voice steady, though her pulse raced beneath the surface. "Captain Torres," said the deep voice on the other end. "This is Colonel Briggs. We need to speak with you. Discretion is paramount." Rachel's jaw tightened. The name brought a flood of memories she had worked so hard to bury, long hours in a fighter jet, impossible missions over hostile skies, the weight of decisions that had cost lives. She had expected this day to never come. "Colonel Briggs," she said slowly, "I retired from that life. You have the wrong person." "Not quite," he replied. "You left, yes, but we have a situation that requires your expertise. A rogue stealth aircraft, experimental in design, is operating along the western seaboard. It's undetectable by conventional radar. Civilian lives are at risk. We need Raven 6. Her fingers tightened around the phone. The rogue aircraft, a memory surged, unbidden. It was one of the experimental drones she had helped test years ago, the AI combat software she had developed as part of a secret project. It had been intended to advance defense systems, not terrorize civilian airspace. She had abandoned the project after whistleblowing on safety violations, a decision that had ended her military career. And now it had gone rogue. "I'm done with that life," she said flatly. "I don't fly fighters anymore. I'm a cargo pilot. I save lives quietly, without fanfare. That's all I can do. Lives are at stake." Briggs pressed, his voice firm, but not unkind. "You have the skills no one else possesses. If you don't act, the consequences will be catastrophic." "I'm not asking, Captain. I'm telling you." Rachel stared at the snowy horizon, her breath visible in the frigid air. She thought of the children and families she had saved just days ago in Alaska. She thought of the innocent lives the rogue aircraft might soon endanger. And she remembered the faces of the squadron she had once led, the friends she had lost due to orders she had refused to follow. The same weight of responsibility pressed on her now. Her voice softened, almost a whisper. "Fine," she said. "But I'm not doing this for you. I'm doing it for them, the people who can't defend themselves. That's the only reason I'm even listening." Briggs's tone shifted slightly, respectful now. "Understood. You'll be briefed immediately. A flight team is ready to assist. But Captain Torres, discretion remains critical. No one outside this circle can know of your involvement." Rachel ended the call and looked up at the sky. The wind tore across the snowy landscape, sharp and unforgiving. She felt a familiar thrill of anticipation, a spark that had lain dormant for years. She was no longer a cargo pilot. She was Raven 6. The journey to the base was quiet, Rachel's mind focused, calculating. When she arrived, the hangar doors were already open, revealing a squadron of F-22 Raptors gleaming in the morning light. The young pilots waiting for her were tense but alert, all trained in modern aerial combat, yet untested against a rogue AI-driven aircraft capable of maneuvering faster than human reflexes. Lt. Reynolds and Cap Shaw approached, their faces masks of professionalism, though their eyes betrayed awe and apprehension. "We've been waiting for you," Reynolds said. "We've never faced anything like this before. You're our only edge." Rachel nodded without a word, taking in the jets, the technology, and the squadron's anticipation. Every detail sparked memories of her former life, the roar of engines, the smell of jet fuel, the adrenaline coursing through veins at Mach speeds. This was home, in a way the civilian world could never provide. Inside the briefing room, the details were grim. The rogue aircraft had breached multiple airspaces, evading radar and conventional tracking methods. It had intelligence-level AI, capable of predicting intercept trajectories, making conventional fighter engagement almost impossible. Worse, it had a payload capable of catastrophic destruction. Shaw leaned forward. "It's using flight patterns we only taught in classified programs. If it follows its current trajectory, hundreds of civilians could be in danger within hours." Rachel listened quietly, absorbing every word. Her mind raced through simulations, assessing risk, calculating possible outcomes. The rogue aircraft wasn't just advanced, it was smart. Too smart for ordinary pilots to handle. She felt the familiar fire rise within her, a mix of fear and exhilaration. "You'll fly lead," Briggs said, eyes meeting hers with a quiet intensity. "The others will follow your lead. This mission is high risk. Failure is not an option." Rachel took a deep breath, steadying herself. She looked at the young pilots Reynolds, Shaw, and the rest of the squadron. They were skilled, but inexperienced in the unpredictable chaos of rogue AI combat. It would be up to her to guide them, to be the voice of reason in the storm. She ran her hands over the console, feeling the familiar tactile connection between human and machine. She had flown these aircraft before, felt the power of the engines, the responsiveness of the controls. And now, it was all she had to stop the impending disaster. Her gaze fell on a small photograph, taped inside the cockpit, a reminder of why she flew. Faces of children, families, friends who had once depended on her, and those she had saved over the years. The responsibility was heavy, but it grounded her. This mission was bigger than glory, bigger than redemption. This was about protecting lives. "Let's move," she said finally, voice calm but authoritative. "I don't care if the AI is faster than we are. We fly smart, we fly precise, and we fly as a team. Nobody dies on my watch." The squadron followed her out to the runway, engines roaring to life. The sound resonated deep in her chest, a familiar rhythm she had longed to feel again. The F-22 Raptors leapt into the sky, slicing through clouds like knives. Rachel's hands were steady on the controls, every muscle remembering what it meant to be a fighter, to be Raven 6. As they climbed above the Alaskan peaks, leaving snow and mountains behind, Rachel allowed herself one brief thought. This was the storm she had been trained for. Not a weather storm, but a storm of human ingenuity, high and deadly consequence. And she would face it head on. Somewhere ahead, the rogue aircraft waited, calculating, anticipating. And somewhere behind, the world depended on her skill, her courage, and the instincts she had honed in the crucible of war. Rachel Torres wasn't just returning to the skies, she was returning to her destiny. And for the first time in years, she felt alive. The hangar doors opened with a metallic groan, letting in the cold Alaskan air and the bright, slanting sunlight. Rachel Torres stepped forward, boots clicking on the polished concrete, her eyes scanning the row of F-22 Raptors lined up like predators ready to strike. The sleek, angular jets glinted in the morning light, each one a marvel of engineering. She felt a thrill she hadn't experienced in years, the visceral pull of flight, of speed, of power that could bend the sky itself. The young pilots waiting for her were tense, adrenaline written across their faces. They had trained for every contingency, every simulated scenario, but nothing could prepare them for what they were about to face. And none of them knew that the person leading them had once been one of the most lethal pilots in modern military history. Raven 6. "Welcome back, LT," Reynolds said, his voice calm but betraying awe. "We've heard stories, but we've never flown with you." Rachel offered no words, only a measured nod. She didn't need to reassure them. Her actions would speak louder than her words. She moved with the precision of someone born for this environment, stepping into the cockpit with the quiet confidence of a predator. Her hands ran over the controls, checking systems, tactile-like, confirming every switch, every dial, every gauge. Muscle memory surged, reflexes snapping awake. As she climbed into the cockpit, strapping herself in, a flood of memories returned. The roar of afterburners, the slight vibration of the jet beneath her, the intoxicating combination of speed and freedom. She felt alive. Not the calm of civilian flight, not the careful precision of cargo transport, but alive in a way only those who had danced with death at Mach speeds could understand. The squadron followed her lead as they taxied to the runway. Engines ignited, shaking the ground beneath them. Jet fuel and ozone filled the air. Her squadron mirrored her movements, their trust implicit, though unspoken. Rachel knew that the young pilots were skilled, but she also knew they lacked the experience, the instinct that only a lifetime in combat could provide. The moment they lifted off, slicing through clouds into the clear sky above, Rachel's mind was already calculating. She studied the rogue aircraft's potential flight paths, analyzed their own squadron's positions, and mentally ran simulations at speeds faster than the human eye could follow. Each second mattered. One misstep, and the lives below could be lost. "Stay tight formation," she commanded, her voice steady over comms. "No solo runs. Trust each other. I'll guide you. Watch my maneuvers, not just the instruments." Her instincts were uncanny. She anticipated the rogue aircraft's potential moves even before it appeared on radar. The AI-driven plane was capable of incredible speeds and predictive maneuvers, but it lacked the intuition of a human mind honed under combat stress. Rachel's mind was a living algorithm, capable of improvisation beyond any computer simulation. As they approached the Pacific coastline, radar pings flickered. The rogue aircraft was close, moving faster than expected. The young pilots tightened formation, some clearly anxious. She could hear the tremor in their voices over the comms. "Relax," Rachel said firmly. "Fear kills faster than any aircraft. Follow my lead. Trust your instincts and stay alive." She pushed her jet into a series of tight maneuvers, banking sharply to the left, then rolling right, testing her squadron's reactions. They followed, clinging to her movements, their confidence building under her calm authority. She was not just leading, they were learning from every move, every calculation she made in real time. Minutes passed in a tense blur. The rogue aircraft's outline appeared on radar, far more agile than expected, twisting and turning as if it could anticipate their every move. Rachel's pulse quickened not with fear, but exhilaration. The thrill of the chase, the tension of combat, the knowledge that lives depended on her split-second decisions. This was what she had been born for. "Engage when I give the signal," she commanded. "Do not fire prematurely. The drone is predictive. It will anticipate any rash moves. Patience, precision, timing. That's the difference between life and death." She executed a daring maneuver, diving below the rogue aircraft's flight path, drawing it into a trajectory where the squadron could flank it from above. The young pilots mirrored her, their nerves tight, but their trust in her absolute. For them, she was no longer a distant legend. She was their guide, their shield, their strategist. The drone adjusted, attempting to evade the formation, but Rachel's anticipation proved accurate. She had predicted its next move, using her intimate knowledge of flight physics and aerial combat. She called out instructions, her voice calm but commanding. Blake, Shaw, intercept at 30 degrees. Let it overshoot. I'll cut off the angle from below. The young pilots executed perfectly. Rachel's confidence was a stabilizing force, their panic replaced by the calm efficiency of precision-trained maneuvers. For a brief moment, everything aligned the squadron moved as one unit, synchronized by her experience and instinct. Despite the thrill of command, Rachel's mind remained focused on the larger stakes. The rogue aircraft carried a payload capable of mass destruction. Every move she made, every maneuver she guided, was calculated to minimize collateral damage while bringing the threat under control. She remembered the faces of civilians in Alaska, those she had saved from the storm. The weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders like the G-forces in the cockpit, but she bore it willingly. Minutes felt like hours. Sweat trickled down her temple. Her muscles burned with tension, but she did not falter. She pushed her jet to its limits, banking and rolling, cutting sharply to intercept the rogue aircraft's path. Her squadron mirrored her exactly, the young pilot's trust never wavering. Finally, the drone made a critical mistake. It had predicted human pilots, but it had underestimated a pilot with experience beyond any simulation. Rachel seized the moment, positioning herself for an EMP strike to neutralize its systems without causing civilian casualties. Now, she commanded. A pulse of energy surged through the rogue aircraft, disabling its AI systems. The drone's movement faltered and ceased entirely. The squadron's jets flanked it safely, ensuring no debris would hit populated areas. Rachel exhaled slowly, feeling the adrenaline ebb. The mission was a success precisely because of her leadership, her instinct, and the trust she had inspired in her team. She had returned to the cockpit not as a retired pilot, but as Raven 6, the ace, the strategist, the savior in the skies. As the squadron began to return to base, the young pilots looked at her with a mixture of awe and newfound respect. L.T. Reynolds spoke first, his voice quiet but sincere. "I've never flown with anyone like you. That was incredible." Rachel allowed herself a small smile. "You flew well," she replied. "Better than you think. Remember this feeling. Remember how it feels when lives depend on you. That's the difference between a pilot and a hero." The return flight was quieter, contemplative. Rachel sat in the cockpit, watching the ocean stretch below, reflecting on the storm that had brought her back. She had tried to hide from her past, to live quietly as a cargo pilot. But the sky had called her, and she had answered. Somewhere along the horizon, the rogue aircraft lay neutralized, a silent testament to her skill. But Rachel knew this was only the beginning. The world had changed, threats had evolved, and her role as Raven 6 was far from over. And yet, for the first time in years, she allowed herself a sense of clarity, of purpose. She had returned to the cockpit, not just as a pilot, but as a protector. Every maneuver, every decision, every breath in that jet was a reaffirmation of who she truly was. Raven 6 had returned, and the world below was about to learn that heroes never truly disappear. They just wait for the sky to call them again. The Pacific stretched endlessly beneath the F-22 squadron, a sheet of steel-gray water reflecting the morning sun. Rachel Torres, still in the cockpit of her lead jet, felt the familiar hum of adrenaline coursing through her veins. The rogue drone was back. Radar pings indicated erratic movement, swift, precise, almost anticipatory. Unlike the first encounter, this time it wasn't just a test of flight skill. It was personal. Rachel's gut tightened. The patterns of its flight were uncanny. They weren't random. They mirrored maneuvers she had developed herself, advanced combat algorithms she had once embedded in military AI prototypes. Someone had taken her work, weaponized it, and now it threatened lives. "Blake, Shaw, Titan formation," she commanded over the comms. "We're not chasing a machine. We're facing my own ghost." Reynolds' voice trembled slightly. Your ghost?" Rachel didn't answer. She had flown with ghosts before, phantoms of mistakes, failures, and impossible missions. But this was different. This was a piece of her, twisted and turned into a weapon. The rogue drone had no human pilot, yet it moved as if guided by her instinct. It anticipated intercepts, avoided flanking maneuvers, and made split-second adjustments impossible for human reflexes. The squadron pressed forward cautiously. Rachel studied the drone's trajectory. It was moving along a coastal corridor, densely populated with cities and towns. A miscalculation could result in hundreds of civilian casualties. "Raven 6, you're leading," Shaw said, his voice steady but filled with awe. "We're with you." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "Good. Don't fire yet. Let's see what it's planning." For nearly an hour, the chase continued, a deadly dance across the sky. The rogue drone twisted and rolled, each maneuver a challenge, a puzzle to be solved. Rachel predicted its movement at every step, guiding her squadron in perfect synchronization. And then it happened. The drone transmitted a video feed. Rachel's stomach dropped as she recognized the footage, a recording of the mission that had ended her career years ago. Every detail of the failed strike, every decision she had made, every act of defiance and courage was laid bare. Her hands tightened on the controls. "It's taunting me," she muttered, her voice cold. "They're testing my reactions, trying to see how I'll respond." Shaw's eyes widened. "It's like it knows you. Knows everything you've ever done." Rachel's mind raced. Whoever had created the AI had incorporated her personal flight algorithms, her combat instincts into its predictive modeling. This wasn't just a rogue aircraft. This was a mirror of her past, a weapon shaped by her own experience. "We have to disable it," she said, tone firm. "We can't let it reach the city." The squadron moved in formation, approaching the drone with extreme caution. Rachel executed a series of maneuvers designed to draw the drone into a predictable flight path. She anticipated every evasive action it could take, every countermove calculated in the programming she herself had unknowingly contributed to. The drone, however, was adaptive. It had learned from the first encounter, predicting human reactions with terrifying accuracy. It rolled sharply, climbing toward the sun in a maneuver that would blind human pilots with glare. Rachel adjusted, banking sharply to maintain line of sight. "Hold tight," she ordered. "Trust my lead." Sweat ran down her temple, but her hands were steady. Years of experience guided every adjustment, every throttle movement. She pushed the jet to its limits, testing both machine and human capability. Finally, she saw an opening. A brief lapse in the drone's predictive pattern, a microsecond mistake. Rachel knew this was her chance. She communicated instructions to her squadron with precision. "Shaw, Reynolds, flank left. I'll cut off the angle from below. Time it exactly. One shot, no mistakes." The squadron executed flawlessly, a testament to Rachel's leadership. The drone systems flickered as Rachel triggered an impulse from her jet, designed to neutralize its AI circuitry without causing collateral damage. The drone shuddered mid-air, its movements jerky, erratic. And then it stopped. Silence filled the comms. The rogue aircraft was disabled, hovering like a fallen bird over the ocean. Rachel exhaled, feeling the tension drain from her body, but relief was short-lived. Visual confirmation? Briggs' voice crackled over the secure line. Rachel scanned. Confirmed. Drone disabled. No civilians harmed. But it's not over. Whoever made this knew exactly how I think, how I operate. This wasn't random. It was deliberate. Shaw's voice was quiet. You mean someone used your own algorithms against us? Rachel nodded, jaw tight. Exactly. And the person who did this isn't finished. The squadron began to return to base, engines humming steadily. Rachel sat in the cockpit, reflecting on the implications. Her past wasn't just a memory. It was a tool. Someone had weaponized her experience, and that someone was still out there. Back at the base, she debriefed with Briggs and the other officers. The video feed recovered from the drone revealed traces of encrypted communications, suggesting a network of operatives who had access to her old military files. Someone had deliberately created a threat she alone could confront. Briggs frowned. This is bigger than we thought. Whoever orchestrated this knew exactly how to manipulate you. Raven 6. And they have resources advanced AI, aircraft, intelligence. This isn't just a rogue experiment. It's a message. Rachel's eyes narrowed. A message? From who? We don't know yet, Briggs admitted. But they're testing us. Testing you. And the next phase could be far worse than this. Rachel's mind raced. She had spent years hiding from her past, from the people who had tried to control her, from the missions she could never forget. But the past had caught up with her, and it wasn't just a memory. It was a weapon in the wrong hands. She thought of her squadron, young pilots trusting her instinct, following her lead. She thought of the civilians below, unaware of the danger that had just passed over them. And she knew, without a doubt, that she couldn't turn away. Raven 6 had returned to the skies, but now the stakes were higher than ever. The rogue drone had been a warning, a test, and Rachel understood that the real challenge was only beginning. As night fell over the Pacific, Rachel sat in the cockpit of her jet, staring at the disabled drone floating above the ocean. Somewhere out there, the mind behind this was watching, calculating, waiting. And she knew that the next time they struck, it would be even more personal. The past had found her, and now she would have to confront it not just as a pilot, but as Raven 6. The storm in Alaska had passed, but a far greater storm loomed on the horizon. The sky over the Pacific was a palette of bruised oranges and purples as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Rachel Torres sat in the cockpit of her F-22, her fingers poised over the controls, eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of movement. The rogue aircraft was no longer just a machine. It was a message, a test, and possibly a trap. Every instinct she had honed over decades screamed that the final encounter was imminent. Raven 6 were detecting multiple heat signatures ahead. LT. Reynolds reported, voice tight. Could be decoys, could be more drones. Rachel's jaw clenched. Stay sharp. Formation tight. No heroics. We engage on my signal only. Her squadron mirrored her movements, their trust in her absolute. They had seen her skill firsthand, felt the calm authority that could turn panic into precision, and now they relied entirely on her judgment. Rachel knew that if she hesitated, even for a second, lives would be lost. Minutes later, the rogue aircraft appeared, accompanied by 3 smaller drones. They moved with uncanny precision, weaving and twisting through the sky, as if anticipating every maneuver Rachel and her squadron could make. But this time, she noticed a pattern subtle, almost imperceptible, yet unmistakable. The drones were coordinating, using predictive maneuvers derived from her own flight style. 3 on the right, 1 main, she said over the comms. We split into pairs. Reynolds, Shaw cover the right flank. I take the lead. The squadron adjusted, engines roaring as they ascended rapidly. Rachel's mind calculated dozens of possibilities simultaneously. Every decision had consequences, and hesitation could be fatal. The rogue aircraft darted downward, skimming the ocean in a daring move meant to draw the squadron into a trap. Rachel anticipated it, banking sharply and cutting off its trajectory. The smaller drones followed, attempting to cut off her wingman. Hold formation, she barked. We're not letting them isolate anyone. Sweat ran down her temple, muscles taut from tension, but her reflexes were razor sharp. Years of training and combat experience converged into a singular focus. She was not just flying. She was calculating, predicting, anticipating at a level beyond human capability. The rogue drone's operator revealed itself finally a figure in a remote cockpit, monitoring screens with cold precision. Rachel didn't know the identity yet, but she felt the familiar undertow of betrayal and danger. This person had studied her, learned her patterns, and weaponized them. It was personal. Raven 6. The operator's voice crackled over a hijacked frequency. I wondered how long it would take for you to respond. I knew only you could stop this. But can you? You've always run from your past. Rachel's eyes narrowed. I don't run anymore. And you're about to learn exactly what happens when someone underestimates Raven 6. With that, she executed a daring maneuver, a steep dive that brought her directly beneath the rogue aircraft. She forced it to react, exploiting a microsecond flaw in its predictive algorithm 1 she had planted subconsciously in her own flight style years ago, a hidden signature of her maneuvers. Now, she shouted. Reynolds and Shaw mirrored her, flanking the rogue drone from above. The small drones attempted to intercept, but she anticipated their vectors and guided her squadron through precise arcs that neutralized their movements. Rachel's fingers danced across the controls, activating the Emperor once more, this time in a carefully calculated pulse designed to disable the main drone without harming the smaller units, which could be captured for analysis. The main aircraft shuddered violently as circuits overloaded, and one by one, the smaller drones spiraled out of control. The rogue operator's voice was filled with disbelief. Impossible. You know my every move, Hal. Rachel's eyes never left the sky. Because I taught you everything I know. And now I'm taking it back. The rogue aircraft descended rapidly, attempting a final evasive maneuver, but Rachel anticipated it, cutting off the flight path with surgical precision. She released a secondary EMP, sending the rogue drone spiraling harmlessly into the ocean. The squadron stabilized, engines humming, as the threat finally ceased. The sun set over the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of gold and crimson. Rachel's chest heaved, sweat and adrenaline mingling, but her mind was already analyzing the aftermath. Back at base, the rogue drone was recovered, and investigations began immediately. Traces of encrypted communications led to a clandestine organization using stolen military algorithms for their own purposes. Rachel's work had been weaponized, but she had stopped it before it could reach full-scale disaster. Briggs approached her, voice low and serious. You saved countless lives today, Raven 6, but this is just the beginning. Whoever orchestrated this knows exactly how you think. They may strike again. Rachel's eyes were steady, resolute. Then we'll be ready. I'll make sure the next time they try, they won't get the chance. The young pilots approached, expressions a mixture of awe and gratitude. Reynolds spoke first. I don't think anyone will ever understand what you just did up there. You weren't just flying, you were predicting, guiding, saving everyone. Rachel allowed herself a small, tired smile. We did it together. Remember this feeling, the calm in chaos. That's what it means to be a pilot. To be Raven 6. That night, Rachel stood outside, looking at the stars reflected over the ocean. The weight of her past, the missions she had left behind, and the friends she had lost, all pressed upon her. But now, she felt clarity, her skill, her courage. Her instinct were not just tools for survival. They were a force for protecting the innocent, for confronting threats no one else could face. Somewhere out there, the rogue operator was watching, calculating, waiting. But Rachel Torres had faced storms before, literal storms, combat storms, and storms of betrayal. This one would be no different. She had reclaimed her past, embraced her destiny, and proven that Raven 6 was more than a legend, it was reality. The sun dipped completely below the horizon, leaving the sky in darkness. The squadron jets rested in their hangars, engines silent, but the air still hummed with the residue of battle. Rachel knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, but for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. Raven 6 had returned, unbroken, unstoppable, and ready for whatever the world dared to throw at her next. The storm had passed. The skies were calm for now. The sun rose over the Pacific base, golden light spilling across the hangars, illuminating the sleek F-22 Raptors that had carried Rachel, Torres, and her squadron through the most intense missions of their lives. The air was crisp, carrying the faint smell of jet fuel and ozone, a reminder of battles fought and victories won. For Rachel, the morning felt like a new beginning, though the weight of her past still lingered like a shadow at the edge of her consciousness. She stepped from her jet, boots crunching on the tarmac, and surveyed her squadron. Reynolds and Shaw approached, their expressions a mixture of exhaustion and awe. "I still can't believe what happened yesterday," Reynolds said quietly. "You led us through impossible maneuvers, predicted the drone's moves like it was second nature. I've never seen anything like it." Rachel offered a faint smile. Years of practice, countless mistakes, and a lot of ghosts to learn from. You did well, too. You kept your composure. That's what matters. The mood among the squadron was tentative, almost reverent. They had witnessed firsthand not just Rachel's skill, but the legacy of experience, instinct, and courage she carried. Raven 6 was no longer a name whispered in legend. It was alive, tangible, a force of protection and leadership. Inside the command center, Colonel Briggs debriefed Rachel and the team. The rogue operator had been identified, a shadowy figure within a rogue military contractor, exploiting stolen algorithms for personal gain. Their capture was imminent, thanks in large part to the intelligence Rachel had provided during the mission. "You stopped a potential disaster," Briggs said, voice solemn. "And you did it with precision, calm, and leadership. You've proven that Raven 6 isn't just a call sign, it's an institution." Rachel nodded, but her thoughts were elsewhere. The missions, the sacrifices, the choices she had made in her past, they all converged in this moment. She had left the Navy years ago, burdened by guilt and isolation. Now she realized that her skill, her courage, and her moral compass had never truly left her. They were tools for saving lives, for confronting chaos when no one else could. Later, Rachel returned to her quarters, alone for a brief moment. She allowed herself to reflect on everything, the storm she had flown through, the lives she had saved in Alaska, the rogue drone, the final confrontation. Each memory was a testament to her journey, a reminder of the choices that had defined her. She thought of the faces she had saved, the squadron she had led, and the truth she had long denied. She was meant to fly, meant to protect, and meant to embrace her destiny. Her phone buzzed. A message from her mother appeared. "Saw the news. So proud of you. Always have been." Rachel smiled, a warmth she hadn't felt in years spreading through her chest. It wasn't just the missions or the recognition. It was the affirmation of purpose, the knowledge that her actions had mattered beyond titles, ranks, or accolades. By midday, news outlets reported the neutralization of the rogue drone and the heroic efforts of the squadron, though Rachel's true identity remained classified. Headlines spoke of courage, precision, and teamwork, but only a few knew the full truth, that a former Top Gun ace, once lost to anonymity, had saved hundreds of lives using skill, instinct, and the wisdom of experience. Reynolds and Shaw joined her later, carrying mugs of coffee, their casual chatter belying the intensity of the past days. "Ever think about going back full-time?" Shaw asked, half teasing, half serious. Rachel chuckled softly. "Not full-time, but I won't run from what I'm good at anymore. There are lives to protect, skies to defend. That's enough for me?" Her squadron members nodded, understanding implicitly. They didn't need words. Her actions had spoken louder than any explanation. Rachel Torres was no longer hiding from her past. She was channeling it, transforming it into something greater than herself. That evening, Rachel walked to the edge of the airfield, the ocean stretching infinitely before her. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with shades of red and gold, a reflection of the battles won and the ones yet to come. She breathed deeply, savoring the quiet moment before the next challenge inevitably arrived. The rogue operator had been neutralized for now, but Rachel knew the world would always produce threats: rogue technologies, unstable forces, people willing to exploit chaos for personal gain. But she also knew she was ready. She had embraced her past, reconciled her regrets, and transformed her experience into action. Raven 6 was more than a legend. It was a living testament to courage, skill, and determination. Briggs approached her quietly, standing beside her at the edge of the tarmac. "You ever think about retiring again?" he asked, tone almost playful. Rachel shook her head, gaze fixed on the horizon. "Not really. I've learned that retirement isn't an option when you know you can make a difference. I can't ignore what I'm capable of, what I'm meant to do." Briggs nodded. "Good. The world needs people like you." Rachel smiled faintly, the weight of responsibility mingling with a sense of purpose. The past, with all its shadows and regrets, had become her foundation. The future was uncertain, but she faced it with clarity and resolve. She had been a cargo pilot, a hidden hero, a ghost of her former self. Now, she was fully alive, a guardian of the skies, a protector of lives, and the embodiment of the legend that had always been her true identity, Raven 6. As the sun disappeared completely, leaving the sky dark but brilliant with stars, Rachel Torres stood at the edge of the Pacific, the wind tugging at her jacket. Somewhere out there, threats would arise, challenges would emerge, and chaos would test the limits of courage. But she was ready. She would fly, she would protect, and she would never run again. The legacy of Raven 6 was secure. It was not just in the history books or classified files. It was in every life saved, every maneuver executed with precision, and every young pilot inspired by her example. Rachel Torres had reclaimed her past, embraced her destiny, and proven that heroes never truly disappear. They rise when they are most needed. And in the quiet of that night, as the ocean whispered beneath the stars, Rachel knew the skies had finally found their protector. The storm had passed. The skies were calm. But Raven 6 would always be watching.